Apache woman pulled the bullet out. The cowboy swore to protect her forever. The storm crawled down from the San Francisco peaks like a white animal with cold teeth. Snow erased color. Wind spoke in a low, grinding tongue. Tyann pulled her grandmother's wool tighter around her shoulders. The shawl smelled of cedar smoke and old winters. She moved through drifts that reached her knees, each step a slow argument with the wind. A basket of roots and herbs pressed against her ribs. She had meant to beat the dark home, but storms never cared for human plans. The hogan was almost lost to sight, a mound of earth against a white horizon. She saw it only when the firelight inside flickered through the storm like a heartbeat. She thought of warmth, of her grandmother's slow humming. She didn't think of death until her boot struck something buried in snow. At first, she thought it was a fallen log. Then it breathed. A man lay face down near her door, half covered in the drift. His coat was stiff with ice. One hand gripped the earth as if trying to hold on. Blood had frozen dark on his ribs, a crusted patch where life leaked slow. His horse was nowhere. His hat lay a few feet away, brim cracked, dusted white. She bent, brushed the frost from his cheek. Pale skin, beard rough. When his eyes opened, they were the color of dawn sky before the sun admits defeat. Not proud, not pleading, just tired, the kind of tired that carries miles behind it. He tried to speak. Wind stole most of it. "Don't trouble," he rasped. Tyann didn't answer. She had seen men left for the coyotes after raids, seen breath fade under a sky that didn't bother to watch. This one was still breathing. That was enough. She slipped her arms under his shoulders, her back screaming from the pull. The snow resisted. She resisted harder. Inch by inch, she dragged him to the doorway. The hide curtain of the hogan slapped against her face as she kicked it open. Warmth hit her like a wall. Smoke and cedar filled her lung. Her little brother, Nalin, sat up from his blanket near the fire, eyes wide. Her grandmother, Shadi, looked up from the pot she stirred. No surprise. Only that old way of measuring life, the quiet count of breath versus loss. "Water," Tyann said, "and the copper bowl." Together, they brought the man in. His boots left a dirty trail across the packed clay. The hogan seemed smaller now, filled with cold air and the smell of blood. Tyann cut away the coat and shirt. The wound was angry, high on the ribs, deep enough that breath whistled through it. She held the knife over the flame until the metal glowed. Its color changed from straw to orange. Light danced on the walls. She cleaned the skin with handfuls of snow that hissed as they melted. The man flinched, but he didn't wake. The bullet sat inside him, a black seed waiting to kill. "Hold him," she said. Shadi's hands were thin but steady. Nalin pressed against the wall, watching, eyes too old for his years. The world had already shown him that gentleness rarely lasts. The knife went in. A sharp breath escaped her, not from fear but focus. The man's body arched, even unconscious. She kept going, her jaw locked. Blood welled around her fingers, hot and slick, running down to her wrist. She found metal, gripped it, pulled. The slug dropped into the copper bowl with a sound small as rain. The air changed. Everyone in the room exhaled, as if the world had been holding its breath too. "Will he die?" Nalin asked, voice a tremor between fear and awe. "Only if he chooses to," Shadi said. Her tone was flat, dry as a winter twig breaking underfoot. Tyann cleaned the wound again, packed it with crushed herbs, and bound it tight with linen. Her fingers ached, but her hands stayed steady. She had learned young that steady hands keep souls from leaving. Outside, the storm kept talking, endless and low. Inside, the fire threw small suns across the walls, across the stranger's face, a face carved by weather and years. A healed scar ran through one brow. His jaw was strong, but his lips looked unfamiliar with laughter. Hard life, no self-pity. Tyann rinsed her hands in the bowl. The water turned pink, then brown. She didn't ask his name. Names could wait. Breath came first. When the work was done, she sat against the far wall, knees drawn up, watching the rise and fall of his chest. Shadi fed the fire. Nalin fell asleep sitting, head tilted back, mouth open. The only sound was the wind scratching at the roof, and the low creak of logs settling in heat. Oars dragged long. The night had a spine of iron. Tyann counted his breaths until she began to borrow them. Once she dozed and dreamed of her mother's voice soft, fading in the snow the way voices fade when the wind decides to own them. When she woke, The fire was a nest of embers, and gray light filtered through the smoke hole. He stirred. At first, she thought it was the wind again. Then he moved his head, eyes fluttering, catching the dim light. The blue had softened, no longer frozen, just uncertain. He tried to lift his arm, failed. His voice came out rough. "Where?" "You're safe," she said. The words tasted strange in her mouth. English never felt right. It broke the air in the wrong places, but she used it for him. Careful, plain. He blinked at her. "Why?" "Because someone should." Silence fell again, thick and clean. The wind sighed, easing its grip on the door. Somewhere outside, a raven cried, and the land answered with echo. Inside that small circle of warmth, Tyen watched him drift back into sleep, his breath steady, his face turned toward the fire like a man who still believed in morning. She didn't know who he was, or what road had torn him open. She only knew that leaving him out there would have been one more cruelty in a world already full of them, and she was done watching cruelty win. Days bled into one another, sweat and ice trading places on the man's skin. Fever came and went like a restless ghost, rising, breaking, returning. He muttered through it, words half-formed, memories spilling out like cracks in old wood. Margaret. Should have been faster. Names and regret tangled together until they were one. Tyen kept a bowl of snow by the fire, pressing handfuls to his brow when heat rose too high. She wiped his face with care that looked like patience but was really discipline, the quiet kind born from too many losses. Shadi brewed sage and willow bark tea, its scent sharp and earthy. Nalin fed the fire until his eyes grew heavy, then curled beside the dog, one hand under its ear as if promising not to leave. Outside, the storm loosened its grip on the land. Inside, time shrank to breath and heartbeat. By the fourth morning, the man's eyes opened clear, like sky after long snow. He tried to sit. Tyen pushed him back down with 2 fingers, firm and calm. "You tear my stitch," she said. "I start over. That will hurt us both." He managed a rough laugh, the sound catching in his throat like a broken fence post. "Yes, ma'am," he rasped. He drank water slow, swallowing as if the act itself was work. His voice came low, roughened by miles and cold. "I'm Eli," he said finally. "Tyen." She didn't offer more. The room didn't need it. Smoke from the fire drifted up through the small hole in the roof, carrying scent of cedar and damp wool. Eli's eyes followed it, then wandered to the basket of roots in the corner, the carved plume used for prayer, the stones stacked near the wall in deliberate order, all small signs of a life arranged with care, without excess. His gaze held a question, "Why did you help me?" But he never asked. The answer, he seemed to know, wasn't his to claim. When he could sit without shaking, he watched Nalin carve a small horse from a piece of juniper. The knife was dull, the strokes clumsy. Eli reached for it before he thought to ask. "Here," he said. His voice was softer now. "You turn the blade this way. Let the wood tell you where it wants to go." Nalin blinked up at him, surprised that a man who bled so much could speak so gentle. He did as told. The curls of wood fell smooth after that. Tyen watched from the hearth, silent. But the corner of her mouth moved slightly, not a smile, but the ghost of one. Eli spoke in pieces, never straight. Fragments fell out like ashes. "A ranch in Wyoming. A good man shot in a night raid." "Should have been faster," he said again, quieter this time. "She called me a coward. Maybe she was right." Tyen didn't answer. Words were not meant for every wound. She only listened, and that was more mercy than most men ever earn. When the storm broke and the light softened, the air in the hogan turned easier to breathe. Tyen spoke then, her voice level, as if talking to the fire instead of him. "My mother was beaten at the trading post," she said, "for speaking Navajo. The storeman made me watch. He told me I should learn English faster." She stirred the coals with a stick. "I did, but not the way he meant." Eli's eyes dropped to the fire. His jaw worked once, twice. He didn't say "I'm sorry." He only reached forward, added a stick of wood, and checked the bandage at his ribs. His fingers were clumsy but gentle, more careful than before. The thaw came slow forgiveness dripping from the eaves. Snow softened into mud. Wind lost its teeth. Eli, still thin and pale, began to move with purpose again. He split cedar logs, slow and exact, letting bark fall in even skirts. He fixed the door latch so it closed tight against the cold. He mended a cracked water gourd with pitch. He taught Nalin how to throw a loop, steady wrist, and quiet aim. He never touched Tayan. When he spoke, it was plain, "Where do you want this?" Or, "I'll be back by dark." It was enough. One morning, Tayan saddled the mare for the trading post. She tied her braids with leather and packed 2 silver coins. "You will not come," she told Eli. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "All right." The trail to town was mud and ice. At the counter, Mr. Pike counted her coins as if they'd crawled out of dirt. "Cash only," he said. "No credit to the—" He stopped himself, but the word savages hung in the air anyway. Tayan didn't blink. "That's all I have." He shoved a small bag of salt toward her. Women nearby whispered loud enough to be heard. "Heard she took in a stray," one said. "Heard she's got white fever," another laughed. Tayan didn't look at them. She took the salt, straightened her shoulders, and walked out. The wind met her like an equal. She didn't cry until halfway home, one sharp sound, broken and gone before it finished leaving her throat. When she reached the hogan, Eli was waiting. He didn't ask what had happened. He only watched her carry the salt inside, eyes steady, mouth tight. Before dawn the next day, she woke to the sound of hoofbeats. He'd taken Shadi's old roan and vanished into the fog. By afternoon, he was back. The horse's flanks were wet with sweat. Eli climbed down slow, wincing at his ribs. He carried a sack of flour, another of salt, a tin of coffee, and a folded piece of calico cloth, the cheap blue kind with white stars. Nalin's eyes widened. "Where's your gun?" Shadi asked from the doorway. Eli set down the sacks. "Sold it. That gun kept you alive," Tayan said quietly. There was no anger in her voice, just a kind of weary disbelief. He met her eyes. "You kept me alive," he said. "Let me pay fair." The words fell between them like something more than debt. Tayan looked at the calico, at his empty holster, at the way his hands shook slightly. She could have scolded him, could have called him foolish. Instead, she folded the cloth over her arm, treating it as something sacred. "Thank you," she said at last. The words felt strange in her mouth, small, but heavy. They fit. That night, Nalin fell asleep wearing the new boots Eli had brought. He refused to take them off even when Shadi laughed and tugged at his feet. The dog sighed beside him, half jealous, half content. Eli sat near the fire, mending his torn coat in silence. The needle flashed with each flicker of flame. Shadi watched him from her mat, eyes sharp behind the calm. She saw something in him, the kind of tired that wanted peace, not pity. She thought to speak, to warn Tayan about hearts and debts and how both can break the same way. Then she decided against it. The hogan was small that night, holding 4 people, and a silence so deep it felt holy. The fire hummed. Outside, the wind had turned soft, and somewhere in the dark the snow was finally melting slow, steady, like forgiveness finding its way home. Late March thawed the ground and woke up the meanness. Snow melted, but cruelty never did. It only waited for the mud to dry. Hoofbeats came one morning when frost still crusted the grass. 3 riders, dark coats, clean hats, and the kind of righteousness that smelled like rot. Deacon Pike rode in front, his false smile sharp enough to cut skin. Sheriff Rawlins followed, quiet and unsure, eyes darting anywhere but at Tayan. Behind them came Elder Grant, counting sins the way men count cattle, slow, thorough, and always someone else's. They dismounted without a word of greeting. The sound of spurs on hard ground was colder than the morning air. Eli stepped from the shed, shirt open at the ribs where healing had barely finished. Bruises still marked him like faint brands. He set down the mallet, wiped his hands on his trousers, and looked at them straight on. Pike's voice was honey over rust. "We've had concerns," he said, letting his eyes wander over the hogan like a man sniffing for something he already decided to hate. "A white man lying in a Navajo home, a boy corrupted by sin. We can't have that now, can we?" Nalin stood near Tayan, his small shoulder pressed tight against her hip. "She saved my life," Eli said, his voice rough but steady. "I work for my keep," Grant snorted. His mouth was a thin, mean line. "In exchange for what? I don't see a ring on her hand. Or yours." Tayan stepped forward, planting her boots in the dirt. She didn't raise her voice. The wind did that for her, carrying it clean through the space between them. "He breathes because I cut the bullet out," she said. "He eats because we share. He sleeps because winter kills fools who close their doors." The smile slid right off Pike's face, His jaw tightened, the pretense gone. "You'll watch that tongue, girl," he said. "The boy comes with us. He'll be placed in a Christian home. He can't learn right in this." Rollins shifted beside his horse. His discomfort was clear, but not enough to matter. "No," Ellie said quietly. Pike turned his gaze on him, eyes narrowing like a knife finding the right angle. "You? You're nobody. A drifter with no past worth naming. Your dust doesn't settle long enough to cast a shadow. And you," his stare slid to Tyan, "you're less than nobody under law. 3 days. The drifter leaves, or we file papers. The boy will be placed out." He said it like scripture. Then they turned and mounted, leaving in a clatter of hooves that sounded like chains dragged over stone. Silence filled the world they left behind. Not peace, just the sound of something heavy sitting on every chest. Shadi's shoulders sank. Nolan stared into the dirt, as if the ground might open and swallow him before the law could. Tyan didn't move. Her eyes followed the dust of the departing horses until it was just sky again. That night, the shed light burned faint behind the hogan. Tyan followed it. Eli was inside, rolling his blanket, slow and deliberate. The moon cut his face in half light on one side, shadow on the other. The sight made him look like two men, the one who'd stayed and the one who was leaving. "So you go," she said. "Not a question. If I stay, they'll take him." His voice cracked once, like a green branch under too much weight. "You are not the reason they are cruel," she said. "They were born to it." He didn't answer. He tied the roll, pulled the rope tight. "Some men," he said, "have a talent for leaving." He tried to make it sound like a joke. It wasn't. The quiet between them was sharp enough to draw blood. Tyan stood a moment longer, then stepped forward. She took his face in both hands and made him look at her. Her thumb rested on the scar above his brow, like she could close a door against the cold there. "Stay until spring," she said. "If you must leave after, leave as a man who kept his word, not as smoke." "Done." He breathed once, twice slow, deep, like a drowning man learning to trust air again. "I'll stay," he said. It should have eased the ache. It didn't. Cruelty had a deadline now, 3 days, and the wind seemed to carry it, whispering through the cracks. 2 days before Pike's threat ripened, Tyan rose before dawn. She saddled Shadi's mare, braid swinging heavy against her back. The horizon was thin and gray, a blade waiting for light. Eli stood in the doorway of the shed, his bedroll untouched by the wall. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Don't leave until I return." She stepped toward him, laid a hand against his chest. His breath caught under it. Then she kissed him quick, fierce, a spark in cold air, and was gone before he could answer. She rode hard. The trail to town cut through thawing fields, mud sucking at the mare's hooves. When she reached the church, Pike was inside, polishing his words like knives in scripture. He looked up, startled to see her framed in the doorway, light spilling around her. The pews turned. Eyes followed her like the weight of a noose. She could feel the judgment before the words came. She faced it head on. "I will come to the spring dance," she said, her voice steady. "With him." Murmurs rippled like snakes through dry grass. "If you have words," she continued, "say them there in front of everyone. No more whispers behind hands. No more papers in dark corners. No more pretending concern while your hand is in our bowl." For a moment, no one breathed. Pike's face curdled, color rising like bad wine. His wife looked away. Rollins shifted, shame flickering across his face before he killed it. Somewhere in the back, a man snorted a laugh, then stared at the floor, afraid he'd been seen. Tyan didn't wait for reply. The wind had already spoken for her. She turned, mounted, and rode out, her heart a hammer, her breath sharp as glass. By the time she reached the hogan, evening had draped the sky in copper. Eli waited on the porch, his shadow long against the dirt. He stepped forward as she dismounted. Worry and wonder mingled in his eyes. "What did you do?" he asked. "I gave the voice back to my bones," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then the corner of his mouth lifted slow, disbelieving, turning into something almost like joy. "All right," he said softly. "Let's dance." And the world, cruel as it was, seemed to hold its breath. For one quiet second, even the wind stilled as if listening to a promise finally spoken aloud. The spring dance came like a second thaw, not of weather, but of hearts that had stayed frozen too long. The town hall smelled of dust, ink, and pine oil. Its wooden beams groaned under lantern heat, as if civilization itself were holding its breath to see who would walk through that door. When Tyan stepped inside, silence fell so sudden it might have been a prayer. She wore a buckskin dress, mended and brushed to softness, the beaded collar once her mother's. Every stitch held memory. Her braids were tied with strips of dyed hide the color of clay after rain. She stood straight, eyes calm, neither proud nor afraid, just present. Eli came beside her in a clean white shirt, borrowed from Hob, the rancher who'd once tipped his hat at them without scorn. His boots were scuffed, his face freshly shaved, but the scar at his brow still cut clean through a reminder of how far a man must walk to find peace. Nolan clung to Shaddy's hand, boots new and stiff, chin lifted like he understood this moment mattered more than anyone had told him. The music stopped. The talking stopped. Every pair of eyes turned. Some faces hardened, carving themselves into the stone mask people wear when they've already chosen not to know you. Others wavered curiosity, tugging at old prejudice. A few nodded, small and hesitant, like men acknowledging a neighbor they'd wronged and didn't quite know how to apologize to. Martha Rawlins, the sheriff's wife, stepped forward. Her voice was soft but sure. "I'm glad you came, Tyan," she said. Not loud, not pitying. True. Tyan inclined her head. "So am I." Behind her, Eli shifted his weight, hands twitching like he wasn't sure where to rest them. Then Hob clapped him on the shoulder with a grin. "I've got fence work that needs a good hand," he said. "Pays fair if you'll take it." Eli didn't trust his voice. He just nodded. Sometimes words are the first thing to break a fragile peace. Then the fiddles began slow, cautious, like they too weren't sure what this night might become. Eli leaned down, murmured, "I dance like a man trying not to fall off a cliff." Tyan's mouth curved slightly. "I don't care," she said, and placed her hand in his. They moved together in a small, uneven circle, half stumble, half grace. His steps were awkward, hers quiet, measured, yet somehow they found rhythm. Boards creaked beneath them like old memories retold. Around them, whispers rippled and faded. People watched, some disapproving, others caught in something they didn't have a name for. Not everyone can stand to see peace where they expected shame, but the ice had cracked, and water always knows where to go once given a path. When the music slowed, Eli's hand lingered at her waist, uncertain, reverent. Tyan didn't move away. The silence that followed was different, not hostile now, but listening. Sheriff Rawlins approached next, hat in hand. Tyan felt her shoulders tighten, ready for insult, ready for law. But he didn't reach for the badge at his chest. He only nodded at Eli. "Hob serious," he said. "Morning 7 sharp." Then, almost as an afterthought, he looked at Tyan and said, "Ma'am." It wasn't friendship. It was air clean, needed, unexpected. When they left, the night outside was clear and sharp, the stars pricking the sky like small lanterns hung too high to touch. Nolan swung their joined hands as they walked, laughing for the first time in what felt like a season. Shadi followed behind, her breath rising white and steady, humming some old tune that carried no words, just peace. Tyan listened for that voice in her mind, the one that had always told her to shrink, to lower her eyes, to survive by silence. It was quiet now. Not gone, just quiet. 2 weeks later, the valley was a quilt of color. Yellow buttercups along the stream, purple pasque flowers nodding in the wind. The earth, once hard and scarred, had softened. Eli worked Hobbs' ranch by day, mending fences, branding calves, earning the kind of respect that comes slow and grudging in these parts. Every evening, he rode back when the light turned gold through the oaks, dust following him like a loyal shadow. He'd drop his pay on the table, a few coins, sometimes nails or planks, each one a small proof that he intended to stay. One night, he placed something different in her palm, a small turquoise stone, smooth and imperfect. "Found it by the creek," he said, awkward. "Figured I'll get you a ring proper someday." Tyan studied the stone, then looked at him, eyes warm. "This one's proper," she said. Later, Eli carved a ring from cedar wood, set the turquoise in the center with careful, clumsy hands. Tyan slid it on her finger. Her hands were scarred from years of work, leather, rope, soil, but the ring made them beautiful, not because it shone, but because it fit. They married where the water slowed between cottonwoods. No priest, no paper, only wind, river, and witness. Shadi spoke the old words, voice like the low hum of the earth itself. Eli said, "I will," like a man burying something heavy, his past, his weapon, maybe his guilt. Tyann didn't answer. She just took his hand. Her silence was her vow. No town bells rang, no crowd gathered. But the sun leaned close, warm and forgiving. Even the river seemed to pause, listening. Deacon Pike didn't come that day. His papers sat unsigned on Rawlins's desk until the ink went dry. Some sins die in paper. Others die when the world stops believing in them. The days after were simple, but no less holy. Eli built a pen for goats, square and strong. He repaired the corral until it stood straight. He learned the land's language, when to plant, when to let it rest. Tyann turned soil that had only known wind and placed seeds she could trust. Beans, squash, tomatoes. Nellen practiced roping the posts until he could rope the dog. And the dog forgave him every time. Shadi sat outside spinning wool, watching the horizon like someone who'd lived long enough to know peace never stays, but it can be invited back if you keep the door open. On a Sunday that smelled of rain's cousin, Eli found Tyann standing near the fence, eyes on the far blue edge of the world. "What?" he asked, resting his arm along the rail beside her. "I keep thinking about that night," she said. "You in the snow. The way the storm swallowed your name and I had to give it back." He turned, brushed her braid back over her shoulder, and took her hand. "You did," he said simply. They stood there for a long time, the wind gentle, the world wide and quiet. No church bell, no hymn, just two people breathing in rhythm with the land. That was church enough. Summer came slow, burning clean across the valley. The sun hung long and low, bleaching the bones of the earth, until even the wind seemed too tired to stir. The fields shimmered. The creek shrank to silver threads, and every sound, the cry of a hawk, the creak of a saddle, the clank of a water pail, carried farther than it should have. Eli kept work. Day after day, he rode the fence line at Hobbs' ranch, mending what winter had broken. His hands toughened again, his shoulders filled out, and the rhythm of honest labor began to settle the ghosts that used to ride beside him. Hobb kept his word, paid fair, and didn't ask questions that didn't need answers. The sheriff nodded now when their paths crossed in town. Martha Rawlins sent a loaf of bread once, wrapped in cloth and still warm, left at their door without a note. Pike still preached, but to smaller crowds. His thunder sounded thinner these days. Belonging didn't come like a parade. It came like water, slow, stubborn, finding cracks in stone. It seeped into the quiet of their lives, not with welcome but with a kind of permission. They were no longer whispers in town. They were just names people said without flinching. Sometimes that's all a person needs. By mid-season, the world had softened. Nolan's laughter carried across the field while he chased a chicken he swore could outsmart him. Shadi sat by the doorway, her spinning wheel turning, humming in that deep, low tone that sounded older than words. The air smelled of dust, mesquite, and beans cooking slow over the fire. That evening, Eli came in from the pasture. Shirt dark with sweat, hat pushed back, eyes gentle the way men's eyes get when they finally believe they can rest. "Come with me," he said. Tyann followed him across the ridge behind the hogan, where snow had buried the world only months before. Now grass swayed there, green, alive, bending with the breath of summer. Small yellow flowers dotted the slope like little suns trying their best. Eli stopped near the old cedar stump and took something from his pocket. A silver buckle, worn dull, the engraving almost rubbed smooth. "This," he said, holding it out, "was from Wyoming. Belonged to the man who taught me to ride straight and shoot honest. When he died, I kept it. Told myself I carried it for his memory." He looked out over the valley, eyes narrowing in the gold light. "But it's just a thing," he said softly. "A piece of a life I'm not going back to. I don't need it to remember anymore." He turned to her. "I need you." Tyann said nothing. She reached out and took the buckle, its metal warm from his hand. For a long breath, she held it, then slipped it into the pocket of her dress. She didn't say, "Thank you." Gratitude wasn't enough for a gesture like that. Instead, she brushed the hair from his brow with the back of her fingers, and that was her answer. They stood together as the sun sank low, the sky turning to fire and then to ash. The wind passed gentle between them, carrying the scent of dry grass and far-off rain. Later, The hogan glowed like a coal against the dark. Inside, Shadi hummed something that might once have been a song or maybe just a prayer that had forgotten its words. Nalin had fallen asleep on the floor, a rope looped loosely in his hand. The dog curled beside him, snoring like a man who'd had too much to drink. The world had narrowed to breath and peace. Tayan stood outside with Eli, watching the smoke rise straight into a sky that didn't judge. The cottonwoods along the creek whispered but kept their counsel. The stars came slow, one by one, as if careful not to startle the quiet. She looked at the house they'd built, not much more than logs, mud, and but it was theirs. Every nail, every board, every seed in the small garden outside had come from hands that refused to give up. "Thank you," she said. Eli turned toward her, surprised by the softness in her voice. "For what?" "For staying." He smiled, small, real, and touched her face like it was something fragile the world had lent him for safekeeping. "You saved me from being a ghost," he said. Tayan's eyes found his in the half-dark. "We saved each other." The land around them, which had watched everything with the hard patience of the desert, seemed to ease a little. The wind shifted less cutting, more kind. It wasn't a miracle. It was work, the kind of work that doesn't end when the sun goes down. It was a choice made every morning to rise, to try, to stay. It was a man who sold his gun to buy flour, and a woman who walked into a room full of people who hated her and asked them to dance anyway. It was a boy wearing boots too big, a grandmother's quiet prayer spoken to a sky that rarely answers, and a silence that had learned warmth. This was the kind of salvation the West allowed hard, earned, small enough to fit in a hand. No preacher's words, no divine thunder, just mercy, coughed up slow by a land that owed them nothing and gave them everything. As summer deepened, their days fell into rhythm. Mornings began with the sound of Eli chopping wood, his axe striking steady as a heartbeat. Tayan ground corn, the soft scrape of the stone echoing through the quiet. Nalin fetched water, tripping over his own rope and laughing when he spilled more than he carried. In the afternoons, heat shimmered off the dirt like breath. They worked until the air itself felt heavy with sleep, then rested in the shade. Shadi told old stories, ones from before the long walk, when the stars had names and the rivers had voices. Eli listened, not understanding every word, but hearing the truth in her tone. Sometimes Tayan would watch him from the doorway, the way he sat still, the way his hands rested open on his knees, like he'd finally stopped gripping for life. It was strange, she thought, how peace could look so much like exhaustion and how beautiful that was. By September, the light changed again. The air turned sharper, mornings cooler, the edges of the leaves curling to red and gold. One evening, Eli and Tayan walked down to the creek. The water was low, clear enough to see the smooth stones underneath. They stood barefoot in the shallows, the chill biting but clean. Eli bent, picked up a flat stone, and skipped it across the surface. It jumped twice before sinking. "Still can't do better than 3, he muttered. Tayan bent, found one of her own, threw it without thought. It danced 5 times before slipping under. Eli laughed a real laugh, low and easy. "Guess I'm keeping score wrong." She smiled. "That's because you're counting jumps. I'm counting echoes." They stayed there until the stars took the sky. The sound of the water, the whisper of the trees, the far cry of a night bird, all of it folded into one long breath that felt like belonging. When they finally walked back, the lamps inside were already lit. Smoke drifted from the chimney in a soft column, rising into the same sky that had once looked down and found them unworthy. Now, it seemed to look kindly, or maybe they'd simply stopped asking for its approval. When the wind came down again from the peaks that fall cold, sure, ancient, it found them still there, still together, still choosing. And that, in the hard arithmetic of the West, was as close to grace as anyone ever got. cowboy took 5 stabs for the Apache woman, but when he woke up, 3 Apache women were standing and waiting for him. I'd been riding since before dawn, long before the sun thought about climbing over the sandstone ridges. The air was cold and mean, the kind that cracked your lips and made every breath taste like copper dust. My horse's hooves made no sound on the hard ground, only the wind moved, hissing across the red flats like it had something to say and couldn't find the words. I hadn't spoken to another living soul in 23 days, and truth be told, I didn't miss the company. Silence had its own kind of mercy. They say a man can get used to being alone if he loses enough. I never believed that until I buried my wife and boy 6 winters back, buried them myself with hands still shaking from fever, in ground too dry to take them easy. Since then, I'd ridden away from everything that ever carried my name. The army brand, the settlement, the friends who stopped calling me Cal. All of it. Out here, there was no one left to disappoint. Just miles of open land, and the kind of quiet that doesn't judge you. The desert doesn't care if you pray or curse. It takes both the same. That morning, I was running my last line of traps near Tohatchee Basin before the first snows came down from the north. I wasn't chasing anything noble, just trying to stay a step ahead of hunger and cold. The basin's what's left of an old river plain, carved through by dry arroyos and brush that hides snakes better than it hides men. The kind of country where bones bleach quick. My ribs still ached from an old break that never healed right, and the saddle rubbed a sore near my hip that had been bleeding since gallop. I didn't much care. Pain meant the day was real. I remember thinking I'd go another hour before turning back. Maybe set camp near the canyon wall where the wind died down at night. That was before I heard it. It wasn't an animal sound. Not quite human either, not at first. A cry, sharp, then swallowed quick, like someone had covered her mouth. It came from the cut ahead, the kind of dry creek bed that hides everything bad the desert spits out. I reined the horse to a stop, listening. The wind dropped. Another sound followed, boots scuffling against rock, and a low voice, mean, laughing. I knew that laugh. I'd heard it in border towns when whiskey and cruelty ran cheap. My hand went to the rifle slung across the saddle. Every part of me said, ride on, keep moving. Not your fight. But my legs were already dismounting before the thought finished. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was that I'd seen too much of this once and done nothing. I tied the reins to a mesquite branch and moved down the wash, quiet as a man with a death wish. The dirt gave way to stone, and I could smell sweat and fear before I saw them. 3 men, white, filthy, wearing coats too thick for this heat. 2 held a Navajo woman by the arms. The third had a rope looped, grinning like a dog that thinks it owns the bone. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, her lips split, barefoot, dust in her hair, and still she stood like she'd rather die on her feet than kneel. For a moment, I froze. Not because I was afraid, but because I'd seen this scene before, years back, in another canyon, with smoke rising behind me. Back then, I'd looked away.